Thank you very much, Richard. It is a pleasure to be here and a real honor to be here following Ambassador Dermer and Member of Parliament Kotler and President Lawrence, and with the esteemed colleagues who follow me. My topic is to discuss the combating the assault on Israel's legitimacy, and you've heard from Ambassador Dermer, actually from all three speakers, about delegitimization in various parts and facets of it. Because we're running a little late, I will be somewhat truncated and leave time for discussion afterwards with my brilliant co-panelists. We're all smiling, thank you. I guess to talk about delegitimization, I talk about it from the framework that we work at the Jewish Federations of North America with the Israel Action Network, which is the effort that the Federation system, along with the Jewish Community Relations Councils, the JCRCs, represented by the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, have put together to give local communities the intelligence, the knowledge, the know-how, the messaging and assistance to combat delegitimization as it comes to local communities. So to start, I think it's important to define what delegitimization is. The delegitimization of Israel is a global campaign to demonize and isolate Israel in order to undermine the sovereignty of the democratic Jewish state of Israel and the two-state solution. BDS, which we know as the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions efforts, is a tactic that delegitimizers use. There is a network of delegitimizers known as the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, who are communicating with each other, who developed a network whereby they're able to test and experiment along the way to see what tactics work to try to delegitimize Israel. You've heard definitions of delegitimization here today. There are examples that have been referred to. One that comes to mind, particularly having had Ron Dermer here with us today, is when Ambassador Michael Oren was shouted off the campus stage at the University of California, Irvine. There are boycotts of Israeli products like Sabra hummus. There are efforts to that the president just mentioned, Fred just mentioned, talking about the American Studies Association, various scholarly organizations that come together to delegitimize Israel. The bottom line is they seek to treat Israel in a way that no other sovereign nation is treated. Much as Richard just gave the example of how the Israeli Supreme Court isn't even referenced by the World Court. We see delegitimization of Israel in other world bodies, in the United Nations, as Erwin spoke about, where Israel is treated, again, like no other sovereign nation is treated, where Israel is not permitted to be at the table to discuss the future of Israel, where other parties seek to internationalize the dispute, and again, treat Israel like no other country. What we try to do with the Israel Action Network is to focus on the messaging, and I think that Erwin Kotler was brilliant when he spoke about how this is not new, how this didn't start at Durban, but rather Durban was the culmination or the codification of these efforts. We've seen this song before. We've seen this song since 1948, where Israel has been delegitimized. And frankly, if you look at Natan Sharansky's definitions of anti-Semitism, we've seen this song for thousands of years. And we see these delegitimizers, often led by anti-Semites, who use anti-Semitic language and photos and pictures, as we've seen with the Presbyterian Church and their publication, which actually just until this week is for sale, still on the Presbyterian website, which talks about Israel, about Jews and Israelis in classic anti-Semitic language. What we've tried to do is focus within the Israel Action Network on the key bodies who are responsible for these decisions, and they tend to be progressive elites. And Erwin Kotler talked about, and Fred just talked about, how we often like to hear things that work within rooms like this, that work around our Shabbat tables, that work when talking to Israeli activists, pro-Israel activists. But when we're talking to progressive elites, something that Ron Dermer said is incredibly important, which is that history goes back to breakfast. That when we talk about history with progressive elites, with students, with others who are the leaders of these organizations, they're not interested in 1923 or 1948 or 1967. They're interested in what can happen today in the situation on the ground to make the situation better for both parties. So So we need to talk in a language that focuses on these progressive elites, people who should be pro-Israel because Israel's stellar record as a democracy, because of Israel's stellar record on women's rights and gay rights and union rights, but who are pulled because of those activists on the other side, those agitators on the other side who pull them because of the post-1967 reality that Israel is today. We need nuanced and sophisticated messaging that focuses on them directly, that recognizes that, again, what we say to that audience needs to be measured and focused and melded for that audience. It's an audience that, again, often when we're talking about younger people, they don't have the historical knowledge that we bring to the table. For instance, there's polling data that the Israel Project did that showed that the vast majority of individuals under the age of 30 have no idea what apartheid means or what apartheid is. And so when we create a reference, or when we allow the other side to create a reference that frames apartheid as being synonymous with 2014 Israel, we're falling into that trap of allowing them to define the terminology. Similarly, the vast majority of progressives have never heard of BDS. They've never heard of it. It's just not something that's in their universe. And so similarly, when we talk about BDS, we help to build the name ID of this very tactic that we seek to bring down. Let me just conclude by saying that we have been proud to work left, right, center, Orthodox, conservative reform, with every facet of the Jewish community to fight the delegitimization of Israel. It's something that we think it's important that we have the right people around the table at the right time who can speak the language of the audience that they're speaking to. And so I'm very proud that we've been able to bring in the entire community under one umbrella to push forward and to ensure that the messaging that we push forward is one that will be the most effective in order to stop this scandal of delegitimization of Israel. But I think, again, important to recognize that this is the new face. It's one that melds as we win and as we lose, that seeks to transform itself in a way that can be successful going forward. And I appreciate the work of the Israel Forever Foundation, the work of my co-panelists and others within the Jewish community to push back on this. And I look forward to a discussion as we move forward. Thank you.